Hey Optimancers, Chris here. I expect a shorter video today, and I've covered this topic before, but it's always been buried in bigger topic videos, so I figured I should do a standalone video for a guide for players for when their paladin should use the option to smite. I'll be following up this video with a video for a Hexadin build, and rather than just bury all this information in that video, again, here's my suggestions on how to use smite. Okay. So a paladin at level 2 gets spell slots and the smite feature. It reads, starting at 2nd level, when you hit a creature with a melee weapon attack, you can expand one spell slot to deal radiant damage to the target in addition to the weapon damage. The extra damage is 2d8 for a 1st level slot, plus 1d8 for each spell level higher than 1st, to a maximum of 5d8. The damage increases by 1d8 if the target is an undead or a fiend, to a maximum of 6d8. So the quick method to determine how many d8s you're rolling is you take the level of the spell slot you're expending plus 1. Then one more if you hit an undead or a fiend. It's important to note that you don't get any benefit from expending a spell slot of over 4th level. I mean, paladins alone eventually get 5th level spell slots, but using them on smites just doesn't make any sense. My recommendation is to basically never use a spell slot of higher than 4th level. 5th level slots are very powerful and should be able to get you better results than a single smite will ever likely deliver. One misconception I see all the time is an assumption that if you multi-class your paladin with a full spellcaster like a bard or a sorcerer, it's going to give you a lot more spell slots to smite with. And that's not necessarily true. Like, it kind of depends on your level, but let's say you have an 11th level character. So if you are an 11th level paladin, you have 4 1st level slots, 3 2nd level slots, and 3 3rd level slots. Now let's say you multi-class your paladin. So now you're 6th level paladin, 5th level sorcerer. Well, now you have 4 1st level slots, 3 2nd level slots, and 3 3rd level slots. That's exactly the same. You just happen to have 2 4th level slots as well. But your overall number of slots isn't that much greater. And then once we get past 4th level slots, we're going to not want to use those on smites. So this idea that if you play a Sorcerer or a Bard Paladin that you're going to have all these more smites, that's actually a myth. We actually reach our limit on 1st and 2nd and 3rd level slots without getting to super high levels. You might have a couple more slots to smite with, but it's not nearly as dramatic as it's sometimes advertised. Now, I have seen dramatically swinging recommendations with players I've played with to online discussions, ranging from you should almost never use smites to spell slots basically being smite slots. And I've seen it played both ways. Personally, I don't fall into either camp, and I don't think either recommendation is optimal. The optimal way is a balance in between the two. Smites can be a useful tool. We can actually deliver more damage with a smite than an equivalent level spell would ever deliver. Likewise, there are times that a spell slot could deliver way more damage or provide greater benefit than a smite could ever do. I can't say what your priorities with your character should be, and if you're trying to boost your damage numbers, then you might use smites in cases where other paladins might not. But regardless of your priorities, I can give you some general guidelines that I think will help you make that decision when it comes up. One thing you should always consider. Just be aware spell slots are valuable. Spell slots are more than smite slots. Know what you're giving up when you smite. A 2nd level smite might deliver 13 points of extra damage. But if you then need that 2nd level spell slot for a Misty Step later and suddenly can't use it because you spent it smiting, you might cost yourself several times that amount in damage. Heck, you might even lose your character. Spells are useful and powerful and versatile. Make sure that when you smite, you consider that you're trading something to get that smite. Now here's a general guideline I want to go over before I tell you 5 times I think you should consider smiting. Don't deliver a smite if you think that the attack is likely to drop the enemy on its own. If the attack on its own drops the enemy, then you're just throwing away that spell slot. Like with most things, there are occasional exceptions, like if the enemy regenerates unless it takes radiant damage, for example, but in general, don't do it. So here are the 5 cases where I would consider using smites. Number 1, smites deliver more damage to Undead and Fiends, but it's not an even ratio. It's a flat D8. This means if you choose to smite an Undead or Fiend, and it's certainly more tempting to do so, just be aware, if you want the biggest bang for your buck, use a lower level spell slot. A first level spell slot used to smite one of these creatures gets a 50% boost to damage, while a 4th level slot only gets a 20% boost. That is a huge difference. So if you want to attack Fiends and Undead and you get a regular hit and you're thinking of using a slot because you get that additional D8, just be aware your best value is a first level spell slot. Number 2, some creatures are vulnerable to radiant damage. Monsters that are shadowy, like shadows or shadow demons or shadow horrors, and a handful of other creatures have this vulnerability. Now, I would say that your base assumption should be that any creature you attack is invulnerable unless you know specifically otherwise, because damage vulnerability is actually quite rare in the game. But if you discover a creature is vulnerable, that's double the damage. Then you take something like a shadow demon, when you're already getting an extra D8, then suddenly a first level spell slot is delivering 3d8 damage doubled. That's the kind of damage you would expect with a much higher level spell slot, including using an action to cast it. Here you get that damage without using an action or a bonus action. That is a fantastic deal. Number 3, some creatures are resistant or immune to your weapon damage. Now, hopefully, when this comes up, you have a magical weapon that you need to bypass those resistances or immunities. But if you don't, and some creatures even have resistances to magical bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing, depending on the type of creature, then smiting at least gives you one method to do damage or full damage to those enemies. Keep in mind that magic weapon is a 2nd level paladin spell, so by level 5, if you don't have a magic weapon, you should have a spell prepared that gives you one, and that's probably going to serve you better than a single 2nd level smite. Now, number 4 is the big one. Smites double their damage when you score a critical hit. Like with vulnerability, this can be a lot of damage. 4d8 with a first level slot, 6d8 against undead or fiends, up to 12d8 with a 4th level slot against an undead or fiend. When you critical hit, it can be really tempting to smite, and I think it's optimal to consider it, but there are a few nuances I think you should keep in mind. If the extra damage isn't needed, then it's really not giving you anything more. Like, if you need 9 more damage to drop that foe, adding 18 more isn't really giving you anything more than a non-critical. Also, consider your enemy. I just played in a one-shot where we had 2 encounters where we had one big boss that was continually summoning minions in the fight. If you're spending smites on those minions, then you could be fighting all day and run out of smites. Save them for that enemy that's doing the summoning. Dropping them as fast as possible gives exponential rewards because you're also preventing new enemies from joining the fight. But big enemies in general, those with legendary resistances, your spells are less likely to be effective against them. Or, with powerful actions and legendary actions, getting them out of the fight as soon as possible can be a major turning point in that battle. And this goes for critical hit smites. It actually probably goes for any smites as well, so this could almost be a category on its own. But if you hit a creature and you think the smite will drop it, so your weapon damage, you don't think it's going to be enough, but you think, if I smite, I think there's a good chance this creature will go down, that is probably going to save you an attack, and that is good for your action economy. So another case where you would consider using a smite. So those are the cases where I think critical hit smiting really pays off. And the 5th is, I would consider smiting when things get desperate. Sometimes fights are exceedingly difficult, or maybe they weren't intended or expected to be that difficult. But now all of a sudden they are. I mean, maybe you just got really unlucky. Maybe your party made some tactical errors. Maybe the enemies have been just rolling really well. Maybe the DM threw something at you that they thought would be easier than it actually is. Maybe party members are down. Maybe you're about to go down. In these cases, you want to pull out all the stops. Unexpended spell slots, they're just not doing you much good at the end of a fight. that has everyone in need of a long rest. Or worse, that you lost. If things are desperate, just ask yourself if there's anything else you could do with those slots to turn things around. And if there isn't, then frankly, I'd smite every time I hit. So there are 5 times you should consider smiting. Keep these in mind when you play a paladin, and you'll end up with a pretty good balance of casting powerful spells while still getting dramatic smite damage. Optimal smiting is an exercise in balance between those two things. I hope that's helpful, and it will be relevant to the Hexadin build I'll be presenting in my next video. And until then, I am going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody. Talk to you soon.